Brenda, 28, a travel influencer whose life looked like it was pulled straight from a digital postcard, closed her eyes for a second, trying to push away the persistent nausea that always accompanied her on flights. Her millions of Instagram followers only saw the glamour of exotic destinations, but few knew of the silent dread that consumed her with every takeoff. This, her 22nd flight of the year, was supposed to be just another routine trip to Los Angeles aboard the imposing Atlantic Air Boeing 747, which now taxied heavily down the runway at JFK in New York, but a gigantic that swallowed the cabin light, revealing a bubbling, dark ocean below. The waves, enormous and furious, foamed like sharp teeth. The wind howled, a deafening lament that carried the salty, unmistakable scent of the sea, but also a strange, almost sweet odor that Brenda realized, with an icy chill, was the smell of death. She watched the plane break into two twisted pieces, like a shattered toy, plummeting in slow motion into the blue abyss. The water rose, invading everything, and Brenda felt her throat burn, the salty water entering her lungs, suffocating her. Terror was no longer a possibility. It was a painful certainty. Outside, a gloomy, oppressive sky promised an imminent storm, and raindrops were already gently drumming against the oval window. Suddenly, the vision hit her with the force of a punch to the gut. It wasn't a daydream, nor her usual panic. It was real. The cabin air, previously stuffy and bearing the characteristic airplane smell, a mix of jet fuel, disinfectant, and coffee, turned icy cold, cutting as if the metal walls had evaporated. The monotonous roar of the engines distorted, transforming into a sharp metallic screech, a sound of twisted scrap metal that seemed to tear the very fabric of the air. Oxygen masks dropped, swinging chaotically like macabre pendulums, and the sound of their compartments opening echoed through the cabin, mixing with muffled screams. Then she saw it. A violent, jagged tear opened in the fuselage, not a small hole. Brenda's strangled scream shattered the monotonous drone of the engines, echoing through the cabin and drawing everyone's attention. Her eyes, once bright and accustomed to camera lenses, were now wide with horror, reflecting a light that seemed otherworldly. Her skin, usually tanned and flawless, displayed a cadaverous paleness, and streaks of cold sweat trickled down her temples, dampening the wisps of hair escaping her bun. She squirmed in her seat, as if an invisible force were suffocating her. Some cast irritated, accusatory glances at Brenda, now seen as the cause of all the trouble. She overheard a grumpy passenger, a middle-aged man in a baseball cap and wrinkled shirt, grumbling loudly to his wife. "Because of her, we're going to miss our connecting flight to LA. What a hell. I'm never flying with this airline again." Brenda ignored the stares and the harsh comments, her heart still pounding wildly in her chest, a frantic rhythm that seemed to want to burst her ribs. The smell of jet fuel and wet asphalt, lingering in the JFK air, replaced the smell of death she had sensed on the plane. The temperature had dropped drastically, and a cutting wind from the Atlantic made her shiver. But the cold in her soul was far worse. She felt a strange and unsettling mix of gratitude for being alive and a persistent, oppressive fear of what would come next. If the plane hadn't crashed, what would happen now to all those who had disembarked? The premonition, after all, had been about the plane's fall, not her individual death. Would fate find another way to exact its toll, to complete its macabre cycle? The question echoed in her mind, a dark premonition of the inevitable. I can't breathe. I'm having a collapse." She stammered, the words tripping over each other, almost inaudible amidst her panic. Emily, 30, a flight attendant with a professional smile and immaculately tied blonde hair, rushed to her, her concerned expression contrasting with the usual calm demeanor of her job. "Miss, are you all right? Do you need anything?" she asked, her voice soft but firm. Brenda clutched Emily's arm with surprising strength, her nails digging into the uniform fabric. Her eyes met Emily's, and the terror she conveyed was almost palpable. "No, nothing's all right. This plane ... it's going to crash. I saw it. We're all going to die," she exclaimed, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. Brenda's panic was a contagious disease. Some passengers, previously absorbed in their phones or books, began to stare, curiosity turning into alarm, the murmur growing. The commotion reached the ears of Captain Miller, 50, a seasoned pilot with decades of experience and a neatly trimmed gray beard, who heard the situation over the intercom from the cockpit. His tired eyes, accustomed to routine emergencies, narrowed in concentration. Passenger safety was his top priority. After a brief silence, his grave, calm voice sounded over the aircraft's loudspeakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an unexpected medical emergency on board, we are required to return to our originating airport. We apologize for the inconvenience and appreciate everyone's understanding." A mix of discontent and an almost palpable relief filled the cabin. For Brenda, the sound of the turbine spooling down and the sensation of the plane banking in the air to land brought overwhelming relief, mixed with a stinging pang of guilt. She knew her premonition was real, but how could she convince the world of something so terrifying? How could she explain the visceral feeling of having seen her own end and the end of everyone on board? Back on solid ground, under a fine, persistent drizzle that mingled with Brenda's silent tears, passengers disembarked, grumbling about the delay and inconvenience. The first news arrived in the morning, like thunder from a clear sky, shattering the fragile peace Brenda had desperately tried to construct. David Carter, the businessman from Seat 12C, who had complained so loudly about the delayed flight, known for his booming laugh, she posted stories about the bustling life of New York, trying to project her usual infectious energy and forced optimism. But with every strained laugh for the camera, the image of the depressurized cabin and the ocean swallowing the plane returned, like a horror film replaying in her mind. She was alone in her Bushwick, Brooklyn apartment, a sanctuary that once felt safe, now a stage for her fears. The wind howled outside, mingling with the distant sounds of New York sirens, ambulances, police cars, fire trucks, each sound a potential reminder of tragedy. With every local news report, every breaking alert on her phone, she waited, her heart pounding for the next terrible news. With every phone call from an unknown number, she imagined it would be confirmation of yet another death. The smell of rain and asphalt, which once calmed her with its urban familiarity, now brought a sense of melancholy and imminent doom. She avoided leaving her apartment, fearing that fate somehow would find her on a busy street corner, in a cozy coffee shop, in a taxi, anywhere. Would she be next? Or was her role merely to watch, powerless, this macabre and painful dance of death? The uncertainty was a constant torment, and with each passing second, the invisible web of fate seemed to tighten around her. The weight of the premonition seemed to grow, suffocating her, draining her vitality. She decided to research the other passengers, using her vast network of contacts and her surprisingly sharp amateur detective skills, a little-known facet of her carefully constructed public persona. She used information from the flight manifest she managed to obtain, cross-referencing it with social media data and local news reports. An impeccably tailored suit had died in a bizarre car accident. Sarah Jenkins, a young art student from Seat 8 who had seemed so full of life and eager to start her new chapter in Los Angeles, was found dead in her Greenwich Village apartment, a victim of a gas leak. Authorities ruled it a tragic domestic accident, but Brenda knew there was something more. The neighboring building had suffered a similar gas leak just months prior, leading to a mass evacuation and a series of repairs. It was almost as if fate were arranging the details for the occurrence, ensuring Sarah was in the right place at the right time for her own demise. Brenda remembered Sarah reading a book on fatalism during the flight. And the words now echoed in her mind with an unnerving resonance. Whatever is meant to be, will be. His taxi, en route to Manhattan for a crucial meeting, was struck by an out-of-control logging truck on a busy highway. The scene, described by the police, was horrific. One of the logs had come loose from the poorly secured load, piercing the windshield and hitting Carter directly. Brenda felt an icy chill run down her spine. It was a sudden, unexpected death, almost predestined in its cruelty and irony. She remembered him, impatient, repeatedly checking his wristwatch on the plane, eager to reach his destination. The swiftness with which fate caught up to him was unsettling. The influencer tried to push away the grim thoughts, diving headfirst into her work. 2 weeks later, news of a second passenger shocked Brenda, plunging her back into the abyss of fear. Brenda began to feel a growing paranoia, a constant sense that she was being watched, hunted. With each passing day, the suspense deepened, relentlessly eroding Brenda's sanity. She could no longer sleep more than 2 or 3 hours a night, and when she did, her dreams were vivid, graphic, and deeply disturbing. The plane crash they met in a small cafe in the West Village, far from the curious eyes of the media. Chloe listened to Brenda's story with a mix of genuine concern and a hint of disbelief. A crack in the cobblestone sidewalk on her street, the screeching sound of a rapidly approaching car, a tight, inexplicable knot in her throat when eating even food she prepared herself. She avoided elevators, opting for stairs, even if her knee ached and exhaustion overwhelmed her. She refused to eat anything she didn't personally prepare in her sterilized kitchen. Brenda's apartment, once a haven of peace and style, became a gilded cage, filled with echoes of her own fear, a labyrinth where every corner hid an unseen threat. The silence of the night was deafening, punctuated only by the sound of her own ragged breathing and the frantic pounding of her heart. The walls seemed to close in, and the air grew heavier, thick with the oppressive expectation of the inevitable. She felt the weight of time, each second inexorably dragging her towards the denouement. Fear was no longer an emotion. It was a constant presence, a dark companion that followed her wherever she went, reminding her that fate was lurking, ready to claim its due. "Friend, I understand you're shaken. What happened was traumatic, but accidents happen. It's a terrible coincidence, yes, but it doesn't mean it's a curse or a conspiracy. The odds ... She tried to rationalize, her voice soft. Chloe's words, though well-intentioned, were like water on a stone for the dread that inhabited Brenda. She knew, in her bones, that it wasn't just a coincidence. There was a greater force at play, a dark intelligence orchestrating the deaths of those who had escaped the plane, an entity that seemed to toy with its victims, repeated endlessly with the passengers' faces, transforming one by one into those of accusing ghosts, their empty eyes fixed on her. Her life as an influencer, once vibrant and full of life, a stage for her public persona, transformed into an agonizing charade. Forced smiles for the camera, carefully rehearsed poses, while behind her eyes, terror lurked, a cold, constant shadow. She canceled important events, turned down lucrative sponsorship deals, and isolated herself, fearing that every interaction, every venture outside, would bring her closer to the next victim, or worse, to herself. Brenda sought refuge in her best friend, Chloe, 29, an investigative journalist with a healthy skepticism and a razor-sharp mind. The third death came in an even more unexpected, more ironic, and crueler way. A renowned chef, Michael Chun, 45, who had boasted on the flight about his new Michelin-starred restaurant in Los Angeles, choked to death on a piece of eel at a tasting dinner in a luxurious restaurant. The irony was brutal. A renowned chef, whose life revolved around cuisine, dying from his own food, or rather, from someone else's. Brenda remembered him ordering an exotic dish on the plane and thinking at the time that he had a refined palate. The smell of fish, which she had smelled in the Premonition as a mere detail of the aircraft, now haunted her literally, an echo of fate. Brenda began to see traps everywhere. Brenda's mind, already teetering on the precipice, began to trace patterns, seeking a logic in the chaos of the deaths. Carter, the hurried businessman, died in a traffic accident, speed claiming him. Sarah, the fatalistic student, succumbed to a domestic disaster, a silent leak in her own home. Chun, the gourmet chef, choked on food, the biting irony of his passion becoming his executioner. She wanted to eliminate every variable, every object that could, in any way, become a disguised trap. The first week was psychological torture. The silence of the cabin was deafening, filled only by the crackling of the old fireplace and the amplified sound of her own heart beating frantically in her chest. She found herself jumping at every creak of the old wood, every shadow cast by the flickering flames of the fireplace, which seemed to dance with invisible ghosts. The darkness of the nights was absolute, and Brenda had the constant sensation of being watched by an invisible entity, the eyes of fate upon her. It seemed that fate not only reached them, but made them perish in ironic, almost personalized ways, twisting their lives in cruel and symbolic manners. She watched the snow falling outside, imagining the forms death could take there in that peaceful and untouched setting. A sudden avalanche? A giant tree falling while she collected firewood? The ice, so beautiful in its purity, could be a silent and treacherous villain. The solitude, which she had sought as salvation, was becoming her own trap, a psychological torment that pushed her to the brink of collapse, a slow and cruel form of death. The suspense didn't come from something visibly approaching, but from the void that surrounded her, a void that could be filled by death at any moment, in any form, leaving her perpetually waiting. The premonition, then, wasn't just about the plane, but about a trigger event, an instant of deviation that had unleashed death upon those who, otherwise, should have perished in the air. And what if her collapse on the plane, that desperate act to save everyone, had been the very key to this unleashing? The thought terrified her to the point of nausea. Determined to break the cycle, Brenda devised a desperate plan. If fate operated ironically, perhaps she could trick it, frustrate it in its own macabre game. The cabin was rustic, with no cell signal, internet, or television, only the echo of the wind and the rustle of trees. Snow fell gently outside, creating a white, silent blanket that enveloped her in a cocoon of isolation, a silence that, paradoxically, was deafening. The scent of pine and burning wood, emanating from the rustic fireplace, filled the air of the cabin, bringing a sense of temporary peace, but at the same time, an oppressive and overwhelming solitude. She needed an infallible alibi, a way to be completely out of reach when the next death occurred, a way to become invisible to the clutches of the inevitable. She decided to isolate herself completely, to flee civilization, to disappear from the map, cutting all ties with the outside world. For this, she needed a remote place, without any connection to the grid, to modern life, a place where death itself would struggle to track her down. Her search led her to an isolated cabin in the snow-covered mountains of Vermont, a place so remote it seemed to exist in another dimension. Brenda brought only the essentials, reducing her existence to the bare minimum: bottled water, canned non-perishable food, and a few old books. She spent her days reading, desperately trying to divert her mind from death, but the words seemed to vanish, replaced by vivid and terrifying images of tragedies,